A marriage is built on relationship and connection. So if you're undercutting the relationship and the connection, the disconnection eats away at the heart of that. So just kind of to walk through, there's the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual connection in a marriage. Physical connection, loving touch. Emotional connection, we kind of touched on that, of feeling like you get each other and like you support each other. Spiritual connection is when you're talking about what's most important to you, what you fear, what you hope for, what you're moving towards, those three levels. And that helps people to understand where they've disconnected. You can look back and say, oh yeah, we were very, very connected on this level back then. We're no longer there. So then you can begin to have some ideas on how to rebuild that, if you want to, on those three levels.
Your business's success depends on relationships. Relationships with customers, relationships with employees, and relationships with stakeholders. What do they all have in common? They're all human. Because no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Welcome to the Human Connection Podcast. I'm your host, Carl Ponto. Each week I bring you stories, insights, and practical advice from experts that you can apply to your growing company and daily life. This week I'm excited to connect with Lee Baucom. Lee is a marriage coach, author of 7 books, and host of the Save the Marriage podcast and Thrivology podcast. For over 2 decades, he's helped thousands of couples pull back from the brink of divorce through his coaching, online programs, and a straightforward philosophy. He can't save your marriage, but he can show you how to yourself. Dr. Baucom specializes in helping individuals break through the internal barriers, fear, identity, and mindset that keep them stuck, and his work has made him a trusted voice for anyone who wants to do the hard, important work of transforming their relationship. Congrats on becoming a trusted voice, and welcome to the Human Connection Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on because, well, at first glance, this doesn't seem like a ideal fit for a business podcast, but I think with the sort of coaching you help people with when it comes to rebuilding their relationships with their partners and their spouses is something that a lot of executives and leaders need in the workplace to be able to maintain and strengthen their business relationships. Because I think so many founders and executives are so focused on executing and doing the work, and they're going to have their relationships with their coworkers, their direct reports, their mentors or their board members on pause. And they think that those relationships aren't going to deteriorate from neglect when they really do. And so I'd love to hear more about what you recommend and how you've helped people rebuild those relationships and how that can help founders and executives better lead their teams.
So if we put that out there as one central piece of this, is that disconnection eats away at any relationship across the board, whether it is with any of the important stakeholders, including a spouse. But at business, that's the same. If you have paused a relationship, even if you think it's because you're there to do some other function, to get something else going, there's no such thing in a relationship. You're either expanding a relationship, growing and expanding, or it's shrinking and dying. And so that's an across the board law that we can dive into, particularly how it affects marriage, but also how that extends into the business life.
Yeah. So what are some of the factors involved or things that people? The first maybe is, what are the excuses people make to try and justify the behavior that leads to the deterioration, and what are some alternatives or ways people can catch themselves before they start making those mistakes?
So I think the rationale, whether it's an excuse or rationale, is I've got to devote energy to this. So let's talk it first through in a marriage, and then we can take it into business. So if you kind of notice, and there are parallels, there are absolute parallels between building a business and building a marriage. And I think that sometimes we miss this little fact. So let's go. I'm going to see if I can meld these together for you. So you meet somebody, you're interested in them. Maybe that in marriage is with this person who will eventually be your spouse. In a startup, it's whoever your co-founder is, right? You've got this magic to it and an idea of what you're working on. So in a marriage, you're working on building this relationship. You're building the connection, because the connection is the heart of relationships and across the board. And in a marriage, it's even more focused. So you're building up this connection with this other person. And eventually, you're like, you know what, let's do this for life, like you would with a partner, going, hey, let's build this business. Like, let's get it going. And so with a spouse or future spouse, you're like, let's make this for life. That includes a pretty short ceremony for what that entails. And then you launch into life without much feedback, without much help. It's on the job training with no correction that's happening in the midst of that. So you start building in either good or bad habits. And for a lot of couples, they what I call hit the pause button. And the reason is because they think they have to take all of the energy they were putting into their relationship and now move it to these other areas, whether it's parenting or building a career or hobbies or interest or travel that maybe they had set aside while they were getting to know each other. And they have the best of intentions of, we'll get back to us after we've done this. So let's drop over to business, because I watch the same thing. Founders come together, they have this great idea, and they're like, now we've got this relationship, let's build out this product. And they get focused in all of the little minutia of that and lose track of being the partnership that's between them. But let's go back to marriage. So you've built this relationship, you've established the connection, you hit the pause button thinking, I'll get back to us. But all you're doing is disconnecting that connected relationship. And so the expanding relationship is now the shrinking relationship. And most of the time, the couple doesn't realize it because they've got momentum that feels like they've got this relationship, like they've nailed it down. Now they've got to do these other things. And in the process, they kind of miss the wind down. They miss the places. I've done a lot of consulting. Like, I've done a lot of coaching with marriages. I've done a lot of consulting with small businesses and with family businesses. And I watch the same process happen where they devolve the relationship until they can no longer see the path forward, either in the marriage or in the business, because their thinking has diverted and they never caught each other up on it. They were just drifting along. So the effect of the pause button, it tears down the relationship.
Yeah, there's that misconception that pause means that the relationship is going to stay where it is and not have that drift in it. And it's there's those subtle changes. It reminds me of the whole like frog in a pot of water where you don't recognize the water's boiling till it's too late. And especially if you're so focused on other things, you're not checking in on those relationships. You're not taking time to listen and pay attention, then you're going to miss all those cues. And people, as much as they might disagree with it, you're always growing and changing as a person over time as you have new experiences and new events impact your life. And so if you're not communicating and listening to people and understanding what they're going through and who they are and how they're growing and evolving over time, then that relationship you had that you paused is with someone who doesn't exist anymore because they've grown and changed as a person because they're doing other things. And if you try and unpause it, you're going to suddenly realize that the person who you had the relationship with when you paused it is no longer that person anymore. And that's got to be jarring and make it like where you said that people not knowing how to move forward because the relationship's not where they thought they left it when they hit that pause button.
Yeah.
And so I can see how with like a marriage, that's a big problem for the family and for a business. If the founders or like the other C-suite members are not keeping in touch and not communicating and not understanding each other on that personal level, then it's hard to keep your team aligned and everyone moving in the same direction and valuing the same things. If everyone's growing and changing and drifting in different directions, suddenly you're not in alignment anymore. And the overall direction the business is going in is no longer as agreed upon or as certain as it was before.
Yeah. So part of my question to people is always, where is your focus? And many times people have stopped noticing where their focus is because our focus is where it is. That just kind of makes sense. I'm focusing on this, but when I ask the question, where is your focus? Many couples realize that their focus is no longer on each other. They didn't realize it. They hit the pause for these, what in their mind were legitimate reasons. And now they're focusing elsewhere. They're focusing on the kids. They're focusing on the career. Same in business. Where's your focus? They get hyper focused in certain areas and no longer are including the relationships that are at play. And yet that is the heart. I mean, that is the heart of everything in human life, is these relationships. Whenever we lose track of that, there's going to be damage. And so in a marriage, if the focus is no longer there, the connection begins to deteriorate. You stop paying attention to each other and what's going on in each other's lives. And so many times I'll have couples tell me that they think they're still connecting on the emotional level. There are actually 3 levels of connection. They think they're doing the emotional connection, but all they're doing is reporting to each other. Relationships are about rapport, building a rapport with somebody. The report may be helpful in the practical matters, but it doesn't get us very far in the relationship. So when a couple comes on in the afternoon and like, how was your day? Well, I had a meeting and I did a report and I did this. That's a report of the day, but it does nothing to tell me how you were during the day, like what was going on within that. That's rapport. And I see it in businesses. I see it in marriages. The difference is a business is often sustainable by a mission of building profit that can carry it through a lot of this. A marriage is built on relationship and connection. So if you're undercutting the relationship and the connection, the disconnection eats away at the heart of that. So just kind of to walk through, there's the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual connection in a marriage. Physical connection, loving touch. Emotional connection, we kind of touched on that, of feeling like you get each other and like you support each other. Spiritual connection is when you're talking about what's most important to you, what you fear, what you hope for, what you're moving towards, those 3 levels. And that helps people to understand where they've disconnected. You can look back and say, oh yeah, we were very, very connected on this level back then. We're no longer there. So then you can begin to have some ideas on how to rebuild that, if you want to, on those 3 levels.
Yeah, I was just about to ask. It seems like when you break down the 3 different levels of connection, it's becomes easier to see where the relationship has deteriorated because the sort of interactions have changed. And so what are the ways that people can go about repairing these relationships, either for marriages and for like the business sense? What are some of the activities that or kind of habits they need to rebuild in order to do the hard work to repair these?
So we've named the first thing, and that is the question, where's your focus? Because you get to control your focus. I mean, that is one of the things we can control in our life, is where am I putting my focus? And if you're putting your focus back on the relationship, now you can see where are those points of disconnection. The diagnosis of connection is there, those 3 levels. You know, how are you connected physically, emotionally, spiritually? That's the diagnosis, but it's also kind of the path out. How do you reconnect on those other areas? So when I'm talking with couples and they want specifics on what to do, many times, because it's a broad path on where those 3 levels could be, my suggestion is a little bit more than what you're doing now, not a lot more. That's one of the biggest mistakes people make, is they're like, oh gosh, we're disconnected. I'm going to do these big things to get us back, like date night, like a big romantic gift or a trip or something like that. And it's too much for the lack of connection that's there. So it can't hold that. There's nothing wrong with a date night. There's nothing wrong with a romantic getaway. There's nothing wrong with a romantic gift if the connection is there to support it. But it doesn't substitute for the daily connection. And it gets in the way of the daily connection. And so stepping back and asking, how can I increase the physical connection? What do I need to? And that's based on where you are right now, a little bit more. Where can I add some emotional connection? A little bit more. Where can I add some spiritual connection? A little bit more. The tricky one for many people is the spiritual connection. And so one of my suggestions for people is that maybe you see a TV show or a series or a movie or a book that made you think about life in a different way. Like there's something there that you're like, oh, that philosophy of life is interesting. that when you share that, you're sharing something about what that meant to you, but one step off. It's not so direct as saying, well, let me tell you about my big dreams and hopes about in life and what scares me in life, because that's a bit too much for a lot of couples. But to say, I read this book and it was talking about this, and I found that to be interesting because of this, is saying something about what matters to you, but slipping it in the side door. And that's a way of opening up those conversations again.
Yeah, I like that suggestion because I think you're seeing that, we've seen that some recently with people that are they're claiming they're trying to be authentic, but they kind of overshare. They're going too big of a gesture at once, like you said, that and the initial relationship isn't there to support it, so it comes across as weird. And it's like proposing to someone on a first date, but it's even if it's not the first date, but it's somebody you just you hadn't talked to in a while, like that. The huge gesture without the strong foundation comes across as awkward and weird. And so I think that I like that idea of having referring to something and as a insight into that deeper connection or who you are and what you care about, what you're thinking about, where your focus is, without being so blunt or kind of tactless about it, and or that kind of into the side door idea, I think makes a lot of sense, because it's something that makes it easier for the other person to engage with without it being as potentially awkward or difficult for them to accept, given that you're at a part in the relationship where it's not as strong as it was before. So I can see if you have a healthy relationship, then some of those big direct statements will be fine because you already have the foundation for it, and there's that trust and that deeper connection where it's we normally talk about these things that we care about on that level. But when you're rebuilding it, you got to have that bit more tactful approach to make sure it doesn't land wrong.
Yeah, you got to have the scaffolding in place. What's interesting about your audience is what I see is the entrepreneurial marriage struggle. And this, so when I say entrepreneurial, that could be true entrepreneur, could be someone who's just C-suite, high up, who's driven by that kind of entrepreneurial spirit. What I see is for many is that there is always the place where they're getting their kudos on the side. There's always this business that is there to give feedback. And when a relationship is struggling, it's often kind of a subconscious need for us to find our sense of competence somewhere. And so you might feel some struggle with that because the marriage isn't where you want it to be. And then you've got this thing off to the side or front and center for many that is the company, right? I can go get my kudos there and I can go do the work which doesn't require my relationship skills. I can just plow in. And that's where I've seen a lot of the, when I watch the high profile entrepreneurial marriage that's in the news falling apart, it's because that founder is so bought into what almost feels like an affair on the marriage, right? It's got all of their energy. It's got all of their excitement. And the marriage where it needs some attention just feels heavy and hard. And so one of the traps for entrepreneurs in a marriage is not just the disconnection, but the lure of the business over that connection.
That's very interesting. And it makes sense when you see like you said, the high profile marriage is falling apart. And I think they've spent so much time where you kind of, like I said, you get that fix in a way from the success of the business, but because the skills that make the business work aren't necessarily the same skills that make the relationship work, their focus is on that because they're getting that kind of the dopamine, the endorphins from that relationship, that experience. Then the relationship with their partner or their spouse fails because it's harder work, different skill set they're not as effective at. And so it's naturally they're don't want to put the work into fixing that as much as they, oh, I can just more easy for me to go double down on the business side of things, and everything just kind of spirals from there.
I remember early, it was probably 20 some years ago, and I had a couple. He was the entrepreneur in the family, and he looked at her, and she was upset about where things were in the relationship. And he looked at her and he said, "It's not like I'm having an affair. There's no other woman." And she turned and just with that stare said, "There absolutely is. It's your business. It's your company. You leave the door, you leave me at home, and you go to your mistress that is the company. And you want to spend your time there, and you get your strokes and your kudos there, and then you come back and you're empty. You do have an affair. It's just your company." And that is often the case with entrepreneurs, and they don't see it from they're just like, I'm using my talents. I'm doing what I love to do, which is all fine. It's not a matter of one or the other. It's making sure you balance the connection in the marriage along with doing what you'd love to do in the business.
So important for entrepreneurs to hear. Well, thank you so much for connecting with me today, Lee. If you enjoyed this episode of the Human Connection Podcast, please leave a comment, and subscribe. If you want to connect with myself or Lee, check out the links in the show notes. And remember, no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Happy connecting.